The year is 2008. Canon has just released the 5D Mark II, a rather standard update to their full-frame photography DSLR line, save for one afterthought: the addition of video recording at 30 frames per second. Video recording that also happens to be the most bocalicious thing that filmmakers had pretty much ever seen up to this point. This kickstarted the DSLR filmmaking revolution and paved the way for most of the compact filmmaking cameras that we use today. But back in 2008, Canon only really had one main competitor. This competitor was the anti-Canon, with cameras and lenses that competed very well on every feature, but had lenses that mounted to their cameras and focused in reverse. I'm speaking, of course, of Nikon, and 2008 was an inflection point in this company's 100+ years of existence. Because unlike Canon, who chose to include professional filmmaking features, Nikon chose to essentially ignore them, and one could argue opened up gaps in the market for Panasonic and Sony to step in. To be clear, Nikon did announce their D90 DSLR in 2008, a camera that, just like the 5D Mark II, could record video, but unlike the 5D, the D90 could only record for 5 minutes and didn't include basic features like exposure control. This lack of even basic control over the video capabilities of their DSLRs persisted for years to come, even as Canon continued to release DSLRs with more and better video features, and Panasonic released the incredibly popular GH series of cameras. After a few years, by seemingly their own choice, Nikon chose to ignore this new filmmaking market, and so it left them behind. In 2011, only 3 years after the 5D Mark II, I still knew photographers that used Nikon, but the vast majority of filmmakers had migrated to Canon DSLRs. Now, here we are, over a decade and change later, and suddenly things are different, because Nikon appears to have finally woken up. Not content to allow Canon, Panasonic, and Sony to dominate filmmaking, in the past few years, Nikon have emerged with mirrorless cameras in their Z series, all of which have decent video capabilities. But decent isn't enough in this age of competition, and Nikon knows it. So in early 2022, they went all out and announced something new. A camera that is so stuffed full of filmmaking features and capabilities that it is essentially impossible to ignore. And I would say, if you're a filmmaker that does not at least have Nikon on your radar, you better add it, because the things that they're doing are incredibly impressive and their future looks extremely bright. This new camera is the Z9. And with the history out of the way, which I think is really important for you to understand the context of where Nikon is coming from, we got to talk about this camera. So in this video, I'm going to be reviewing it from the perspective of a wedding filmmaker and telling you why you need to start noticing Nikon, especially if you've been filming weddings or documentaries or pretty much anything else for that matter. This camera is really impressive. Also, for the sake of ethics, I want you to know this video isn't paid or sponsored by Nikon, and while they did send me this camera to check out, it is going to be sent back to them very soon, and the first time they see this video is the first time you see it when I post it to YouTube. Starting off then, the first thing that you're going to notice about the Z9 is its size. When I first took this camera out of the box, I said, dang, this reminds me more of a DSLR than a mirrorless camera. This thing is chonky. It's big, it's heavy, and you can definitely tell that Nikon chose to go more of the Panasonic route with their mirrorless, where they're not afraid to make them big, versus Sony, who has managed to make their mirrorless cameras a bit larger over time, but are still pretty darn compact by comparison. I would keep the Z9's weight in mind if you're planning on filming a long wedding day, because holding this thing can get tiring after a while. With the Z9's large size, though, you are getting a very well put together camera that ergonomically feels really great to hold. It's also covered in buttons. Wow, so many buttons. When I said this camera is stuffed full of features, I was not joking. On the left side, you have a full-size HDMI port as well as USB-C that supports power delivery, headphone and microphone inputs, and an Ethernet jack, which I know high-end photographers need, but it really does cement that this camera has everything and the kitchen sink. On the right side of the camera, you have dual CF Express Type B card slots, as well as a bright yellow warning here that says, "Caution, hot card," which hot card also happened to be my nickname from high school because you could never mind. Anyways, I love seeing dual card slots as a wedding filmmaker because weddings are one-take events where you do not get any do-overs. And so by being able to record to dual memory cards, this is just another backup that you have for your filmmaking, and I recommend that pretty much anybody that films weddings use dual memory cards. Unfortunately though, Even with dual card slots, the Z9 can only record video to one slot at a time, meaning that it doesn't offer this backup feature. It's not a deal breaker, but there are 2 slots. Come on, Nikon, enable dual recording. This is a weird miss on a camera that's so packed full of filmmaking features. Looking at the back now, you have a really nice sized screen that can tilt up and down and also side to side as well. Unfortunately, the screen does not flip out, so you can view yourself though, but this isn't a deal breaker for wedding filmmakers, I don't think, but if you're a YouTuber, sorry. You have to use an external monitor. One thing that I love, if you look up here above this screen, you're gonna see this little switch that lets you toggle between photo and video modes. And this reminds me so much of the photo and video switch on my Canon 7D. It's cool to see something like this about a decade after I saw it on the 7D. Body out of the way though, we need to talk about the bajillion other features that Nikon managed to cram into this camera. So starting off in no particular order, rapid fire style, the Z9 has in-body image stabilization like most other mirrorless cameras do these days, and in my testing, I found it to be good. The IBIS is not as good as something you're going to get from a Panasonic camera, for example, but it's still very usable. The Z9 also has autofocus as well that works great in video mode. In my testing with the 24-70 and 50mm 1.2 lenses, the Z9 locked onto faces and eyes quickly and easily and held them well. Similarly to Sony's new A7R5, the Z9 uses artificial intelligence to detect different objects and focus on them, which definitely helps. Talking manual focus too, this camera is also really interesting because with Nikon lenses, they normally adjust focus in the opposite direction from all other lenses, meaning that unlike a normal lens where you would rotate it counterclockwise to focus to infinity, with a Nikon lens, you rotate counterclockwise to focus closer. With the lens settings in this camera though, you can actually change the direction that the lenses focus to bring your Nikon lenses in line with all the other lenses out there from other camera manufacturers. This is really cool, and I love that they give you this feature, which is going to make switching to Nikon much easier for filmmakers. Now, let's get to the big enchilada here, and the reason this camera is just so darn impressive. We got to talk about resolution and frame rates, because the Z9 is, in a word, an absolute monster. At the time of making this video, we're seeing a lot of cameras released that film in 8K, but all of them feel like they're just barely hitting this resolution, with compromises to stabilization, codecs, recording times, and crazy rolling shutter, proving that 8K is really in its infancy for mirrorless cameras. With the Z9 though, all of this changes. Where most of its competition is limited to 8K at 24 or 30 FPS at most, the Z9 says, how does 60 frames per second sound with an over 2-hour recording time? Dang, this is nuts. And heck, I can still remember in 2020, whenever specs were starting to leak for the Sony a7S III, and I couldn't believe they might be releasing a camera capable of filming in 4K at 120 FPS. Here we are, after a couple of years have passed, and Nikon's releasing a camera that goes far bigger than that with 8K at 60. So cool. More important than just the resolution though is the video formats and codecs that Nikon has packed into this camera, because this camera is so powerful, it might be illegal. Let me explain. When they first announced the Z9, it was incapable of filming RAW video, but Nikon said that RAW would be coming in a firmware update, and a few months later, RAW video support was added to the camera. So yes, the Z9 can film in 8K at up to 60 FPS in their proprietary in-RAW 12-bit RAW video codec, as well as in 4K at up to 60 FPS in Apple's ProRes RAW codec. This is incredibly impressive. But more importantly, I want you to look at their competition. Notice that Sony and Panasonic do not currently offer RAW video recording in camera, and if you want to record RAW, you need to use an external recorder over HDMI like an Atomos. Now, why is that? Well, remember how I said earlier that this camera might be illegal? Yes, the reason that none of Nikon's competitors have offered compressed internal RAW video recording is due to a patent held by Red, the camera company, not the color. I'm simplifying here a lot, but one of Red's innovations was the creation of a compressed RAW video codec for their cameras, which they applied and received a patent for. Now, I'm not a lawyer, but I've read many articles about this patent that say that it is overly broad and essentially prevents any of their competition from being able to compete in the compressed RAW video space. Red has since taken Kinefinity, Sony, and even Apple to court over this patent, and they've all lost to Red. And I'm pretty sure you're probably thinking, Matt, what about Blackmagic? Oh yeah, Red sued them too, actually. But Blackmagic got around Red's patent by changing the way they record RAW video by partially debayering it in camera. That's a whole other video though. We got to get back to Nikon and them including internal RAW recording internally with the Z9 via a firmware update. In short, this is a very noticeable update, and it's not just something that me or you or other filmmakers are going to notice, because Red noticed also, and they recently sued Nikon over it, and both companies are still fighting it out in court at the time of making this video. Who deserves to win? Like I said, I'm not a lawyer, but I can say that if you buy a Z9 right now today, it has these internal RAW recording capabilities, but I have no clue after this court case is settled whether there might be another firmware update that removes this feature. So I guess that if you're going to buy a Z9, that might be an argument for buying one now, and then just never updating the firmware ever again. Anyways, legality of the internal RAW recording aside, it is incredibly cool to see Nikon not only embracing a proprietary RAW codec with the Z9, but also including ProRes RAW internally as well. This camera gives you so much flexibility. Pretty much every single frame rate or resolution that you could ever want are included in this camera. And if you are a wedding filmmaker, I think this camera is pretty well future-proofed for quite some time. Do you need 8K? Well, no, but having filmed a wedding in 6K before, I really appreciated the ability to zoom in post when I was stuck in the back of a church in the balcony, unable to get any closer. The Red camera that I was using to film in 6K at the time made my life so much easier. So I do think there are benefits to 8K, and plus, if you don't want to film in 8K, there's nothing stopping you from switching this camera down to 4K and filming in whatever frame rate and resolution you want to there. Oh, and side note, in regards to 8K, there unsurprisingly is some rolling shutter, but more importantly, especially if you're filming in RAW, the Z9 eats memory cards like me at one of those sushi restaurants where the sushi comes by on the little train and you pick off the plate and eat as much as you want. Nikon sent me a 650 gigabyte memory card to use with the Z9, and with that card completely empty, I still had less than 15 minutes of recording time available before it was completely filled if I chose to film it in 8K at 60 FPS in RAW. So be careful. This footage is beautiful, but like my beard, it is also dangerous. Speaking of beautiful footage, the Z9 does support recording in Nikon's in-log picture profile, which should give you great dynamic range, and it supports this picture profile regardless of the video format or resolution you are shooting in, which is great. Side note, I have a set of color presets called WhoisMatt LUTs, and I'm pleased to tell you that all of the Nikon footage in this video is colored with those presets, and they work great. I will link to my color presets down below. Now, with all this 8K talk, you're probably wondering how this camera handles overheating. There is a setting in the menu called Auto Temperature Cutout that you can set from standard to high, and the good news is that Nikon has said that this camera is capable of recording up to 2 hours and 5 minutes in 8K without overheating. And even then, the camera won't overheat, but the recording will stop and you'll need to restart it. It's a weird limitation, but it probably won't affect you unless you're filming a super long wedding ceremony or an insane round of toasts at a reception. In my testing, which admittedly it is winter in Texas, so I do not have access to the super hot Texas summer heat to leave this camera out in to test it. Regardless, I did not experience any overheating while I was filming with this camera. Likewise, you may be concerned about the battery life when filming at such high resolutions and frame rates, but I have to say that this camera comes with a massive, and I mean massive battery. Just look at this thing, it's huge. It easily lasts 2 to 3 hours, it's stellar. For a wedding, I still think that you're gonna need 2 to 3 batteries depending on the resolution that you're filming at, and if you choose to film in RAW or not, but the battery life is still very good overall. Now, what about low light performance? If you film weddings, the odds are that you're not going to ever have full control over the lighting no matter what you're filming, so you're going to need a camera that's capable of handling a wide variety of lighting scenarios. In my testing, especially considering that the Z9 is a full frame camera with a large sensor, I found that it looks good up to around ISO 12,800 or so before it started to get really noisy. You could go higher though if you needed to because a reception or ceremony was really dark, but you may be dealing with some noise in your footage. Regardless, I always recommend bringing lights to a wedding or anything else that you're filming, and that is going to result in you getting better quality footage overall. Now, let's talk about the price of the Z9 because this is where I think things get really interesting and more nuanced than just a number. At the time of making this video, the Z9 costs $5,500, which is definitely a hefty chunk of change. But whenever you consider all of the camera's capable of doing, I definitely think it's worth it. For you though, whether you should buy it or not is going to come down to a deeper question than whether or not you can just afford the camera or not. Remember that with any camera, you are buying into an ecosystem, meaning that you need to not only consider things like the camera that you're purchasing, but also what lenses are currently available for it. Can you adapt lenses from other camera manufacturers to it? What accessories can you buy? And what options do you have as far as B or C cameras that you can buy to go alongside it? See, because in a vacuum, the Z9 is arguably one of the best cameras available today, and it's a no-brainer to recommend that you purchase it to film weddings or really, honestly, anything else for that matter. But I want you to take a moment and look at the lenses that Nikon currently has available. I love seeing that they have the basics like a 24-70 and 70-200 available, but they also have cooler lenses like a 50mm 1.2 and even a f.95. All of these lenses are going to be a significant investment, and that 0.95 lenses cost more than what I've paid for a car before, but you need to see if Nikon has all the lenses available that you're interested in using. One cool feature of their website is that it shows you all of the lenses they currently have available, as well as a preview of future lenses they're working on, so this is a great way to do your research. More importantly than lenses though, and this is my main hang-up about the Z9, is that there are currently no other cameras that Nikon makes that come even close to this level of performance that you get in this camera. One thing that I love about Sony, for example, and the reason that I recommend them so much, is that you could go out and buy, say, an FX3 to use as your A camera to film a wedding, but instead of needing to purchase a second or third FX3 to be your B or C cameras, you can instead invest in the FX30, which is going to match the FX3 visually and offer many of the same features as the FX3, but in a significantly more affordable body. Sony offers a great ecosystem of cameras at different price points that match each other visually, making it easy to save some money as you build out your filmmaking kit. With Nikon though, at the time of making this video, they don't have a secondary camera yet that's going to perform comparably to the Z9. If you want to buy another camera that has internal RAW recording, or heck, even 10-bit color without RAW, you don't have any option but to buy another Z9. The Z7 Mark II comes close, but it's still only 8-bit. So we're at an interesting crossroads right now. It feels like Nikon have finally woken up and begun to compete in the filmmaking space, and they've done it with a huge bang with the Z9. But whether I think you should buy this camera to film weddings is going to rely on two things. Either you having a ton of money to invest in cameras and lenses, at which point I would say, heck yeah, buy 2 Z9s and you're going to absolutely love them and make some amazing films. Or, 2, more likely, I'm going to tell you to wait to buy the Z9, because I want to see what other cameras Nikon's going to make that are more affordable that will build out their filmmaking ecosystem better. If Nikon can release a more affordable camera, like a Z7 or Z6 Mark III that doesn't quite attain the heights and capabilities of the Z9, but will be able to match the footage from it, let's say in 4K 10-bit instead of 8K, for example, in that case, I think that Nikon is going to be a very viable option in the camera landscape today. Speaking of viable options, if you're a wedding filmmaker like me that is also watching YouTube, which considering this is a video on YouTube for wedding filmmakers, I would love to help you out. So I've put together a free guide called YouTube Tips for Wedding Filmmakers. This guide is going to share with you some of the biggest practical things that you can do right now to get more views and bookings on YouTube as a wedding filmmaker. It's completely for free. You can download it at the link down below. Thanks so much for watching and have a great day.